Chapter 1. The Hipster Timeline. Part of what makes any discussion of hipsters so tricky is that everyone has completely different, often contradictory definitions of what hipster means. A hipster might live in a $1 million Williamsburg condo or a derelict bedbug factory. A hipster might buy all the latest Apple products or be a Luddite on a typewriter. Hipsters only drink PBR, unless they're drinking locally made organic craft beer. Over time, the word hipster became a Rorschach test for anyone to project their idea of what a young, college-educated person living in the city was. When we talk about hipsters, we're really talking about 4 overlapping eras of hipster culture, allowing their differences to pile up into one big mess. So to start, let's untangle what these 4 eras were by building on Mark Grief's hipster timeline. The white era was the first in the hipster timeline from 1999 to 2003. Think of trucker hats, wife beaters, Polaroids, fake wood paneling, PBR, porno mustaches, aviators, Americana t-shirts, tube socks, and Sailor Jerry tattoos. Think of the bands like The Strokes, The White Stripes, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and Interpol. 1999 was the year Vice magazine moved from Montreal to New York. A-Life opened in the Lower East Side, and American Apparel began its New York takeover. The white era marked a shift out of Gen X's wounded dejection into a millennial emphasis on self-aware debauchery. In New York, the white era was the last vestige of danger before Manhattan became what it is today. In this case, white refers to this era of hipsters' fetish for the violence and rebelliousness of working-class white trash, made famous by Johnny Knoxville and the cast of Jackass in the year 2000. This era's aesthetics recalled the 1970s and its white flight to the suburbs, as if to announce a reverse migration. White people and money would now flow back into the formerly impoverished cities. The boys were back in town, and in their fashion and musical taste, they started right where they left off. But by 2003, the white era's retro Americana appeal started to look very different in light of the invasion of Iraq and nonstop 9/11 remembrances. Hipster aesthetics needed to shift, or else they'd be confused for the suburban chuds they defined themselves as separate from. Next was the green era, from 2003 to 2008. Think of antlers, knit beanies, earthy scarves, floral graphic tees, flannels, fair trade coffee shops, bushy beards, problematic headdresses, and organic farmers markets. Think of fixed gears, tall bikes, and critical mass. Think of Edenic-sounding band names like Animal Collective, Band of Horses, Fleet Foxes, Wolf Parade, and the neo-hippie freak folk genre. 2003's mass protests against the Iraq War raised awareness in the minds of young millennials about America's imperial aggression and reliance on the fossil fuels that were destroying the earth. The aesthetics of the green era turned away from mock violence and toward outdoorsy innocence, recalling an imagined peace among woodland creatures. This theme of environmentalism stirred a hipster interest in where food and drink came from, propelling the popularity of sustainable, fair trade, locally sourced organic free-range items. If peacefully protesting couldn't impact foreign policy, then at least hipsters could vote with their dollar, paying a premium for their peace of mind. Urban cycling became a small act of rebellion against Bush's war for oil, but there was no way you could wear the flared jeans from the white era without getting them stuck in your fixed-gear bike. Skinny jeans became the definitive fashion of the green era. They were as much an import from the Baker chapter of skateboarding culture as they were a natural evolution of the nostalgia loop from the 70s into the 80s. Skinny jeans provided a less macho, more feminized dress code as the hipster silhouette became increasingly androgynous. Frail bodies with long hair wearing skin-tight pants and plunging necklines. 2008 was a confusing time for young people. They were treated to the hopeful victory of Barack Obama's presidency, only to experience the existential defeat of the 2008 financial crisis shortly after, as it destroyed millennials' prospects for employment and their parents' savings. This charged mania kicked off the neon era, lasting from 2008 through 2012. Think of shutter shades, disco pants, Four Loko, headbands, MySpace posturing, sparks-fueled dance parties, and the proliferation of party photographers. Think of DJ bands like Justice, LCD Sound System, Dan Deacon, Girl Talk, and Daft Punk. The neon era was a time of anxiety masquerading as decadence. Maybe hipsters' desire to release this anxiety by shaking their hips moved their idealized home from the forest to the dance floor. By then, the mashup had become a full-fledged phenomenon, drawing on the forbidden pleasure of mixing indie music with mainstream pop hits. Similarly, the neon blogosphere offered an endless selection of danceable remixes for what were previously guitar-driven songs. By the neon era, hipsters were growing tired of the strict focus on obscure rock music from the past. If there's no future, then we should let people enjoy things now. As Pitchfork started offering glowing reviews for top 40 artists, and many indie musicians used their digital popularity to launch into mainstream success, it was around 2012 when neon gave way to the gray era, which lasted through 2014. Think of normcore, athleisure, muted tones, Tumblr micro trends, dad shoes, and proto-influencers using the term personal brand. Think of IFC's Portlandia, HBO's Girls, and Comedy Central's Broad City. Think of Williamsburg getting a Prada store, Glasslands being demolished to make room for Vice Media, and American Apparel's mall expansion to 260 locations. The gray era irreparably blurred the lines between what culture belonged to hipsters and what was considered mainstream. As K-Hole said, when the fringes got more and more crowded, hipsters turned toward the middle. Having mastered difference, the truly cool attempted to master sameness. In practice, this meant taking an approach to fashion similar to what doomsday preppers call going gray man. No logos, no flashy haircuts, just blending in as best you can to avoid becoming a target. Gray era hipsters shunned ostentatious displays of fashion in favor of dressing like toned-down normies, just as normies started to quirk up by dressing like neon and green era hipsters thanks to the growing availability of those clothes at the mall. The gray era also swapped out where hipsters understood the primary place for socializing, going from thinking of the internet as a secondary place used to document their social life to thinking of the internet as the primary site where their social life took shape. In light of this, digital markers of cultural distinction soon became more important than the fashion you wore. The skinniness of your pants mattered less than your profile picture and the articles you shared. By 2015, with hipsters' previously gatekept music, fashion, and customs now adopted by the mainstream, the idea of hipsters as a distinct identity ceased to exist. At this point, at the onset of the digital culture war, the hipster seamlessly transformed into the activist as the new identity for young people to socially distinguish themselves from their conservative, suburban-coded, non-college educated peers. The end of the hipster was less a failure than a success story. The traits that united the four eras were so wholly integrated into the broader culture that the word hipster lost its capacity to describe any specific person. It's not that hipsters died, it's that, like the air we breathe, hipsterdom became both invisible and ubiquitous.